I believe we are live for episode 122 of Trek Live. In this week's episode, we're going to talk about some isolation, some quarantine, which I think a lot of us are going through right now in the current situation. First of all, how you doing this morning, Bill?
I'm doing well, doing the best I can with everything going on.
Yeah.
But looking forward to talking some Star Trek. We talked a lot of Star Trek last night.
Yep.
We had one of our Trek After Dark Discord hangouts last night. Rob was there. Ian's in the chat. Welcome, Ian, as well. Yeah, getting a good Star Trek fix this weekend.
Yes.
Between two shows today and hanging out with everybody who stopped by last night.
Yeah, it should be a fun time. Before we get into the topic at hand, how's your rewatch going? Besides the episodes we watched last night, like you said,
Yeah,
with the Trek After Dark.
Trek After Dark, we watched 3 kind of random episodes last night, and then I watched last weekend outside of my typical standard rewatch that I kind of track on Twitter. I watched season 2 of Discovery again. I think I talked about that a little bit last week, but I finished that over the course of the last weekend into like Monday. I finished it off. So I haven't watched TNG season 3 in the last week. I've been occupied with either the Discovery thing or what we did yesterday. But maybe today I'll get right back into that with Sins of the Father, which is where I am now.
Yeah.
But what about you?
I think I've watched. I forget where I said I was last week, but I think I've watched 3 episodes this week. So I've watched The Tholian Web, Plato's Stepchildren, and Wink of an Eye last night. So 3 episodes, chugging through TOS still. This run was a little bit better. I think The Tholian Web is solid. I actually liked Plato's Stepchildren. And Wink of an Eye was a fun sci-fi concept that I think maybe just it's a fun sci-fi concept, I think.
Wink of an Eye has a good guest star. I think the woman has a really playful yet kind of menacing allure to her. I love Kirk's reaction to her the first time she pops on the bridge. He's got this kind of like, really? Like, like obviously tongue-in-cheek, wink, wink, nod, nod to the audience. The costume, the way she looks. There's some really nice Shatner self-aware kind of moments in that first scene with them together.
Yeah.
It's a neat concept. It's fun. I think some of the episodes that come later in season 3 kind of have similar vibes to Wink of an Eye. So it becomes like one of the episodes that gets lumped in with others that have similar, like Alone on the Ship with an alien kind of stories.
Mm-hmm.
But you'll see more of them as you get further in, I'm sure, again.
Yeah.
But the Tholian Web, like you mentioned, I think is a great episode. I love the way that explores the trio by removing Kirk and seeing how Spock and McCoy operate without Kirk at the top of the triangle. I think that's actually a really good episode. It's got some season 3 hallmarks. It goes a little bit further into the cheesy at times than maybe even the first couple seasons do. But I think at its heart, it's got some really good stuff with characters, and it's got a cool science fiction idea too. I love Spock talking to the Tholians on the bridge. I think there's some really good dialogue with Spock in command, dealing with a crisis. And then Plato's Stepchildren, I'm curious. It's a very divisive episode. It's very dark, but it's also it's like the prime example of like ridiculousness that you can kind of take out of context and put on a clip and say, look how absurd this show is. It's absurd enough with context, let alone without the context of like what the story is and what they're dealing with.
I think that ridiculousness aside, and them doing all of the the ridiculous acting and the forceful kissing and all that, and I think it's it's the right amount of campiness. A little bit. There's like a little bit of maybe social commentary and the way that we treat people differently and but I don't know. I like it. I like Alexander. You talked about guest stars. I think that guest star is pretty strong.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I enjoyed it. Ridiculousness aside,
it is, but I think in context, like it's kind of horrifying. Like it's aware of its ridiculousness. It's putting these characters through hell.
Yeah.
And humiliating them, and they're dealing with the fact that they know they're being humiliated,
right?
For the benefit of these other beings. It's tough to watch at times, for the ridiculousness, for the fact that it is humiliating the characters.
Mm-hmm.
But it's an interesting episode. I agree. Alexander's a good guest star, good actor, playing him. Oscar nominated actor, I think, actually, for I think it's Ship of Fools from 1965.
Gotcha.
I remember watching it and remembering him from Play the Stepchildren. So yeah, there's some interesting stuff going on in that episode.
Yeah,
definitely an interesting episode, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah,
things to talk about.
Exactly.
But let's get into our topic of the week. We're going to talk about episodes that have an element or something that kind of mirrors what we're dealing with now: medical crisis, quarantine kinds of ideas,
isolation. If you want
isolation
to go that route too.
Yeah, we're looking for episodes that kind of speak to the kinds of feelings that, or the kinds of situations that people find themselves in today.
Mm-hmm.
And there are quite a few in different kinds of angles. Not everything is exact. But there are things you could find in a lot of different kinds of episodes that I think lean into these situations that we're finding ourselves in today.
Yeah.
So is there? Go ahead.
I guess I'll just do this. How I came up with these episodes. I tried to get a mixed bag of the different shows. But these are the ones that came to mind like right away. Like these ones just first thing I thought of. So I'm probably gonna miss some because I think we're gonna probably discover that there's a lot of these type of episodes, right? So
yeah,
it should make for a fun discussion and a lot of episodes mentioned. So anyone in chat, definitely fire off a few episodes. We'll definitely talk about a few of the episodes maybe as we rattle off. But Bill, how did you come up with these episodes? Were these the ones that you first thought of, and what was the first episode that came to mind when we talked about this topic?
Yeah, I mean, I started off thinking about. There were a couple that came directly to mind, like that I think are pretty obvious choices. I'm curious to see if they're the same ones for you. But there are others as well. Like I think it's easy to think about this as like a medical quarantine, viral infection. You can find episodes that very much deal with that directly. And then, like you said, the isolation, finding yourself alone, filled with your own thoughts kinds of episodes. Like there's a whole nother element of that might not deal with a viral infection or some sort of disease or something medical. So there's a couple different pools that you can kind of play in here and get some of the feelings and the struggles that we're all kind of dealing with today out onto the screen in Star Trek. So I kind of thought about those kinds of stories. I thought about medical kinds of stories, and I'm sure there are things I missed. I'm sure there are episodes that I didn't think of. So that's why I'm glad we have a couple people in chat right now with Rob and Ian and anybody else that might be lurking or might pop in a bit. If you guys have episodes that come to mind for you, I'd love to hear them, and we'll certainly talk about them as well.
Yeah.
But you asked me which one comes to mind for me first.
Yes,
I have a feeling it might be the same one for you.
Yeah.
You say it. I'm curious to see if it's.
It was Resolutions from Voyager.
Interesting. It's not the same one for me.
Okay,
And that one's not on my list. But you're
if,
absolutely
okay. If I'm thinking of the episode that you're thinking of, I think it's on my list too. But I'll talk about resolutions.
okay.
Obviously, I'm a Voyager guy, but this to me, it has everything, right? It has the quarantine type of aspect to the episode, but it also has the isolation. So it's got both that I think. The two types of episodes that I picked were either the isolation or the quarantine. It has both. So it was the first episode that came to mind. It's one of my favorite episodes, obviously. You guys know that I'm a Voyager guy, but I think the aspect that sticks out to me the most is both the quarantine aspect again and the isolation. So sorry to disappoint you, Bill, but it is.
No, that's great. It's so informed for you. It's
yeah.
In your true fashion, that would be the one that would come to mind, and it's a great call because it does deal with both. It has the two characters, forced to kind of be right on top of each other for extended period of time, for potentially forever, which hopefully we're not looking at.
Yeah.
But
yeah, that's true.
But I mean, you have that element of it. You have the medical, concern. It's because of a medical problem. So yeah, that's one that kind of checks all the boxes. And I'm sure it resonates for people who might be quarantined with like a roommate, somebody where other feelings and
significant
might come out.
Significant
or
other.
A significant other.
Yeah,
yeah, absolutely. You can relate. I mean, there are different elements that come to fruition, I think, depending on who you're quarantined with.
Yeah.
Whether it's a big group, a big family, or just by yourself or with one other person. I think each of these situations are a little different. And resolutions mirrors a certain kind of isolation, I would say.
Yeah.
For me, Rob just mentioned the one that came to mind for me, which is Macrocosm. He's rattling off.
I have that on my list as well.
Yeah. Janeway having it's certainly more of an action adventure kind of story than some of these other ones we're going to talk about, but it's a viral infection that is knocking crewmen out left and right. They're overwhelmed with the crisis of it. So that's one that pretty quickly popped into my head for me. And it's good escapism too. So it's a good episode to watch, I think, in this kind of situation. There are like colors and shades of what we're dealing with, but it's exciting and it's fun and it's action adventure.
Yeah,
it's not as much of a downer as maybe some of these other episodes that came to mind for me, that also cover similar terrain.
Rob also mentions Night. That was on my list as well. That's a little bit more of the isolation end of the spectrum. That's another Voyager mention as well.
Right. Yeah, Night is definitely it was not on my list. I didn't think of that one, so this is why having people in the chat is a good thing. You had it, I didn't.
Yeah.
But Night definitely deals with Janeway kind of being alone in her thoughts and dealing with regrets and second guessing herself. And Night specifically leans into the idea of cabin fever. They're in this region of space where there's nothing to do. There's nowhere to go. There's nothing interesting happening to anybody. Everybody's just kind of alone in their thoughts and right on top of each other, and tensions are building because all the attention is on, themselves and each other.
Yeah.
And in Janeway's case, she self-isolates and finds herself brooding over, how they got into the situation and, the choices she's made and choices she didn't make. And I think that's happening to a lot of people now, particularly people, unlike Resolutions, which kind of speaks to the idea of being quarantined with a significant other, or another person that you have a complicated relationship with, maybe. Night, I think, speaks to the feelings of being alone and having to deal with your own thoughts and not really having anybody to turn to in a meaningful way. So I think that one definitely fits the bill as well.
Yeah. Sticking with Voyager, another one is One, right? That's a little bit of a isolation episode where you're alone for your thoughts and you're,
One is definitely an episode. Like I was saying, there's a degree of medical stuff going on there, but more importantly, it's the isolation and the having to operate on your own and not having the interaction to.
Well, Seven has the doctor, but it's still.
She does.
Yeah.
She's used to having so many voices from the collective.
Yeah, right.
And now on Voyager, she's used to having, the crew, operating around her and people,
Mm-hmm.
everywhere. Everywhere she turns, there's somebody. I think it's such a drastic change for her, and that has an impact on her psyche, and that's what people are feeling now. I think.
Yeah.
Exactly the same thing. So. That's one. Similarly to that one, Doctor's Orders is a very similar episode.
It's on my list as well.
Yep.
Yeah.
Doctor's Orders and one kind of go hand in hand because they're so similar. The ship has to sort of pass through a region of space that's
toxic to the crew. Yeah.
Toxic medical problem.
Yeah.
And only certain people can be awake and operate the ship by themselves. And in this case, it's Dr. Phlox, who is also used to, having his backstory is he's from this planet that's overpopulated and dense family units.
Yeah.
Used to dealing with lots and lots of people. Similarly to Seven of Nine with her experience with Ford. But it's the same kind of deal. The struggle of having to essentially be alone for a long period of time. So those two episodes kind of go hand in hand and definitely tread on the kind of territory that we're talking about here and now.
Yeah.
Rob also mentions 30 Days, Tom Paris being isolated in the brig.
Oh, I didn't
problems.
Think of that one. That's a good one.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's another one where, somebody's alone in their thoughts.
Yeah.
Yep. Very limited interaction. Definitely a,
Catwalk is another, I guess we're kind of in the Enterprise also realm.
Yeah.
So Catwalk is kind of isolation, but a little bit different in that it's really crowded, and it's really concentrated area. Which is that isolation? I don't know. You're isolated to one part of the ship. I don't know.
I think people who are self-isolating with maybe a big family. If you have 3 or 4 kids, and you have people, a lot of people living in your house. I think maybe you could relate to the right on top of each otherness and the cramped close quarters, can't really leave, can't really do much. That the crew's dealing with in the Catwalk. That's a good call. Another Enterprise episode. Rob also mentions Bliss from Voyager, kind of going hand in hand. That's another one where the crew is knocked out, and it's pretty much Seven and Naomi Wildman, I think, is up and awake and not impacted. But very, very limited interaction, having to accomplish something kind of on your own. So Voyager, I think we're finding Voyager kind of.
Yeah, I was gonna say this
might be the common
Voyager, which I guess
lots.
The premise of the show, right, is even in isolation in itself, right? This is an isolated crew very far away with just a crew.
Yeah.
Just for as far as Starfleet goes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Ian mentions Brothers, which has sort of the subplot there. There's the young boy who gets poisoned and is in isolation, dealing with a sort of bacterial infection that's really dangerous and deadly. That's certainly got some vibes that match some of the things we're dealing with. Do you have something that you want to?
Yeah, I'm just kind of moving on to some of my TNG stuff. Genesis. There's some cringeworthy moments in that, but it's also kind of maybe an isolation medical stuff going on there. And then Unnatural Selection, also from TNG. Again, medical kind of quarantine-esque type of episodes.
Indeed. Yeah. There are a couple from Deep Space Nine that I'll throw out there. Actually, before I do that, just kind of lumping back to, since we talked a little bit about Enterprise before we go to a different show, even though we're bouncing around anyway. But an Enterprise episode that kind of can piggyback off of Doctor's Orders. Observer Effect is one of my favorite episodes. Season 4, the Organians are using this viral infection to test different alien species and how they react. And there are some really kind of
Trip dies and
Trip dies,
Yeah.
but specifically, I think of these scenes where Trip kind of goes down first. He starts coughing on the shuttle on the way back, and he collapses. And they get back, and Hoshi starts to cough, and everybody looks at her like, "Uh-oh, here we go."
Yeah.
And I feel like that's exactly what people are kind of going through now. You
Yeah,
cough,
yeah.
and everybody looks at you like, "Uh-oh."
Yeah.
There's some
true.
similar things happening there, but that's got some stuff in it for sure. Crewmen being isolated and quarantined out to deal with an infection that is out of their hands. Like, it's kind of like we're dealing with this. There's not really an easy solution. We're kind of operating without a net.
Mm-hmm.
There's no vaccine. There's no easy thing to turn to and say, well, we'll just shoot the person up with this and it'll all go away. And
Yeah.
the Observer Effect is dealing with the same thing. They're really struggling to wrap their arms around how to deal with this.
Mm-hmm.
There's a helplessness to it. Let's see. In Deep Space Nine, though, I was going to go to a very early episode. It's called Babel. The crew is coming down with this virus that's obstructing their ability to speak coherently. They just everything comes out like gibberish and like random words before they kind of succumb and kind of get knocked out. It's kind of silly, and it's a strange episode, but there are these scenes where people are being quarantined and taken away, and it becomes very mounting, and everybody's kind of going down with it. And there's a struggle to figure out what to do with these people and how to cure them, how to get them back. So that's one that came to mind.
Mm-hmm.
And lastly, with the Deep Space Nine, then I'll turn back to you. The Quickening is a season 4 episode of Deep Space Nine. The planet in the Gamma Quadrant that's been ravaged by a virus that the Dominion injected into the population. And Bashir's trying to wrap his arms around it.
Yeah.
And struggling to do it. Really, really grim, really, really depressing episode. So not necessarily the best medicine for these times. There's not much uplifting about it. So it might not be the best thing to turn to, but I think it deals with a medical crisis that we seem to be kind of that we are dealing with, and we're kind of approaching a level of seriousness. I shouldn't even say that. We have a level of seriousness that I think is reflected in that episode as well.
Yeah. No, Deep Space Nine was on my list just because, again, it's been a while since I've seen it, but yeah, there's I guess the point I'm getting at is that there's no shortage of these types of episodes, right? We've named pretty much every series, almost every series has this type of episode, so it's interesting to see that for sure.
Yeah. There's a ton, and Rob actually mentioned a really good point. He says you could argue that the whole of Voyager is dealing with isolation, really, of being away from their family and Starfleet, and being kind of cooped up on a smallish ship with each other. There are elements. I think that's why Voyager is so easy to find episodes that kind of
because the whole premise of the show.
Yeah, there's a backing to it that it lends itself to these kinds of ideas, I think, and I think the show is sort of already built for it. Definitely true. That Rob echoed he probably said Pride and did the Quickening. Not really quarantine or isolation, right? But the medical crisis aspect of that episode definitely, I think, matches what we're dealing with. Yeah, similar to that, there's the two for the Naked Time and the Naked Now from TOS and TNG. They're a little more Naked Now, especially a little bit more silly. Less serious, but definitely an example of the crew battling a viral infection that's doing one thing or another to the crew.
That happens a lot in TOS, though. True. It was in the Tholian Web too. Recently. It's just like it's almost like it happens a lot, right? Where the crew is being affected by either the region of space or something on the planet, something like that.
Right.
Which I think, I don't know, it's is sometimes successful and other times it just like feels like a.
Yeah, I think it would be fair to call it like TOS trope.
Yeah.
It's territory that they return to often.
Yeah.
I think the Tholian Web specifically. I think I saw a meme in the last couple weeks that had a screenshot of that episode with Spock, McCoy, and Chapel in that lab they're working on to race to find a cure to, get people to deal with what they're dealing with in that region of space. And the meme said something like, "If only these three were working on our problem, we'd be okay. They'd get it just in the nick of time."
Yeah.
And specifically, I think it was from the Tholian Web. So that's one that has some elements.
But you wouldn't expect that to be a quarantine or isolation episode, right?
No,
that's the thing.
Not.
It's just like
right.
thrown in there, like they freak out and lose their mind. That's
right.
Interesting. Yeah. Just because they're in this region of space that's particularly thin. Yeah, but it's just
right. Yeah, I mean that's like we were talking about at the beginning. I think depending on how you want to look at this, like there's the quarantine element of it that has a pool of episodes.
Yeah.
That you can certainly go to, and then you have like the medical crisis element of it as well.
Yeah.
That we're dealing with. There are episodes that aim at that too. That you can find mirrors for what we're dealing with as well.
Sorry, just a little bit of a tangent though. This will connect though. Back to the Tholian Web, the spacesuits. We talked about uniforms last week. I think those are really like those were just really 60s of the time. When I saw those, I was like, man, those. I don't know if those really aged well, but really, or not really, bringing it back a little bit.
Sure. No. Yeah. For sure. That is a unique.
But I think
talking about uniforms.
Maybe just like back to the Voyager point of where they're dealing with isolation. I think space travel in general and being part of a crew and being on a ship has elements of isolation, right? There are these crew members that are not in a, well, it depends on what ship you are, but it's not a very big it's not like being on a planet where there's a big population, right? There's population of the crew, but there's not a lot. There's generally not a lot unless you're on the D where it's like 1,000 or whatever. But
sure, yeah.
Still, I think just space travel in general is have elements of isolation, not just Voyager, but all of them. Well, maybe.
Yeah, you're stuck on this ship.
I don't know.
You have a finite number of places that you can go.
Yeah.
There's really nowhere to turn outside of the bulkheads.
Yeah.
That's I think why in the 24th century having a holodeck is so kind of important. Just to have that change of scenery. You would think being on the NX-01 would be a lot more claustrophobic and more isolating than say being on the Enterprise D or the Voyager. Because of just having the ability to, maybe every once in a while go on the holodeck and feel like you're under a sun and in a completely different environment, not that gray, bulkhead surrounded environment that encompasses the ship. But yeah, that's 100% true. I think that's a really good point.
Yeah. Anything else? I guess before we wrap it up.
No, I don't think so. I think we kind of covered. Dear Doctor, real quick, is another one.
Yeah.
That has some elements of.
No.
It's kind of unusual. It's not the crew that's under the time threat of the infection. They meet this other alien species that is dealing with a genetic problem. But it's on a really massive scale, and the kind of entire planet's population is threat and is kind of slowly whittling away. And there's a real desperation there and urgency to, help turn it around. So there are some medical crisis kind of elements that I think echo our situation in that episode in a different kind of way. It's not our crew that's under the threat. It's an unfortunate alien species that we kind of just come across.
Yeah, that's a great pick. Just because it's like you said, it's flip flop. It's not the crew.
Right.
It's an alien species, which is always fun.
Yeah.
Any Star Trek content that you'd like to mention?
It's going to kind of tie into what we're going to talk about in another 45 minutes or so. But the one thing I'll throw out there is there's a YouTube video. I think it's Wired is the YouTube channel. I'm going to look it up on my phone real quick while I'm talking. But it's like 45 minutes, 42 minutes or so of Akiva Goldsman and Michael Chabon going episode by episode through Picard and talking about the Easter eggs that are kind of hidden throughout the show. It's really meaty. It's really long. It's really it's Wired. The video is titled "Every Star Trek Picard Easter Egg Explained." It's 41 minutes and 21 seconds. So it's longer than some episodes of Discovery. At least there were some Discovery episodes that were shorter than that. And it's interesting. Some are really obvious that I think we all kind of saw, and there's some hidden stuff there that we you had to really squint and look hard for and to kind of get. But it's cool to spend such a long period of time with two of the kind of high-end executive producers talking about the show and all the things that they wanted to get in but couldn't find a way to fit into the show, and things that they did but didn't get on camera. There's a lot of little cool little secrets that are offered there. So that would be my recommendation.
I'll have to watch it. I will do a cop out. I will mention Trek Ranks. They do a redux of the top 5 comfort food episodes, which I think is probably
pretty fitting right now.
Yeah, probably pretty fitting with the climate that we're in. So definitely check that out. And maybe another Star Trek content that I'd like to mention is Core Setting. Core Setting is our podcast that's dedicated to New Trek. So we'll be coming back, like Bill said, 45 minutes over on that YouTube channel to talk about the ending of Star Trek Picard. So definitely go check that out if you want to have some Picard conversations. A little bit of a shorter episode here.
Nothing wrong with that.
Nothing wrong with that. Like Bill said, the discussion does not have to stop here. Lots of Star Trek content this weekend. Like I said, we had Trek After Dark. We got the Trek Live main show, and then we got Core Setting. So the discussion doesn't have to stop here. Best way, probably Twitter, Discord server, both relatively active, and easy way to get a hold of us. Keep the discussion going. We'll be back next week to talk about more Star Trek here on Trek Live. With that being said, we'll see you guys next week.
Yep. Thanks, everybody.